temptation. Temptation is one of those things that we all know happens, but we don't necessarily talk about it a lot. And why, I'm not exactly sure, but we do. We kind of fail to look at temptation and you know, we kind of recognize it in ourselves, but maybe we don't maybe realize what some of our actions do that tempt others. We're going to continue our sermon series this morning. We're talking about behind the scenes in the life of Jesus Christ, and obviously this morning we are talking about the temptation. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 4, and we're going to be in verses 1 to 11. If you would follow along on the board with me. Or turn in your Bibles. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread." But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." Then the devil took him into the holy city and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "On the other hand, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give you, if you fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and began to minister to him. More than just lessons on facing temptation and overcoming it, there are lessons to learn here behind the scenes. And that's the whole point of this sermon series, is that it's behind the scenes, that we're taking this look behind the fact. Adam was the first man. Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and they faced temptation and absolutely failed in the garden. Jesus, however, faced with temptation, he succeeded. Israel, also God's son, failed in the wilderness. Jesus, the true son, succeeds where Israel failed. You see, there's some things behind the scenes. You see, Adam's temptation, and Adam and Eve, where Adam and Eve failed in the Garden of Eden, you see, Jesus' temptation is a redo of sorts. Mankind gets another chance through Jesus to redo the Garden of Eden. And where Adam and Eve failed, Jesus succeeds. Okay? Also, Israel is another parallel. You see, Jesus' 40 days in the desert are parallel to Israel's 40 years in the desert, in the wilderness. And with that said, that every passage that Jesus cites here relates to a failure on Israel's part in wilderness. I didn't realize this until I started digging into the scripture this week, that not only can you look back at Adam and Eve in I believe it's chapter 2 and 3 of Genesis, not only can you look back there at the temptation and see every one of the things that Jesus was tempted with, so was Adam and Eve, and where they failed, he succeeded. Not only that, but you see Israel and the parallels from what Jesus is talking about. It's absolutely incredible. Overall, the big idea here is that Despite temptation, Jesus the Son remains obedient to the Father. And no, we're not wrapping the sermon up after 5 minutes. I'm giving you the big idea now because we need this on the forefront before we go into this. Okay? We need to know that the main idea of this theme is that Jesus the Son remains obedient to the Father despite temptation. Okay? The first category here that we see are physical needs. Okay? Verses 1 to 4 talk about this. He says, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. You see, after 40 days and nights of fasting in the desert, Jesus was hungry. Satan presents himself here by asking Jesus to prove himself by turning the stones into bread. Jesus was hungry. 40 days and 40 nights, no food. I don't know about anybody else, but I'd be more than just a little bit hungry. It would be awfully tempting to turn stones into bread if I had the ability. But notice that Satan says, he doesn't say, turn these stones into bread. He says, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. If you're really the Son of God, prove it. Prove it. You know what Jesus says? I don't have anything to prove. Because man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. 40 days and 40 nights of being in the desert. There are physical needs here that are unfathomable. And let me tell you what, we've only got 3 instances in Scripture where somebody fasted 40 days and 40 nights. 3 instances. One is in Exodus 34:28, which is confirmed by Deuteronomy 9:9. And this was when Moses was on Mount Sinai. When Moses was on Mount Sinai, he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights in Matthew. My goodness. Exodus 34:28 said that he neither ate nor drank while he was on the mountaintop of God. That's what we call a supernatural fast. That's not humanly possible unless you're sustained by God. Okay? The other instance is in 1 Kings 19:8. That was me. Sorry. 1 Kings 19:8. What was it? And this instance is Elijah. And this is after Elijah calls down fire from heaven. And then he runs into the wilderness because Jezebel calls for his head because he killed all the prophets of Baal. And he's in the desert and runs to the mountaintop, and the angel comes and feeds him and says, you need to prepare for the journey ahead of you. And he goes through the desert on what he ate by the campfire for 40 days and 40 nights. The other instance is Jesus fasting for 40 years. You see, instead of Jesus proving himself and his position to Satan, Jesus responds by quoting Deuteronomy 8:3. You see, this relates back to Israel. And they failed in this arena. You see, Exodus 16, the entire chapter of 16, is one example here. You see, Israel was constantly complaining. Well, did you bring us out here because there are no graves? Or did you bring us out here to die? No, we're trapped between the sea and Pharaoh's army. We brought us out here to die. Well, God parted the Red Sea and they moved forward. We're hungry, Moses. What'd you do? Bring us out here to die of starvation? No. constantly complaining. Here in Exodus 16, they're complaining of hungry. You see, the issue that God's trying to teach them here is that God teaches them fasting because fasting brings a dependence on Him. Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Stop to think about that for a minute. Now, I know here, in these parts of the world, we have 3 square meals a day. But all of us who have been here through the School of Missions, and we will be signed up for another year this fall, for another round of School of Missions. But everybody who has been here through the School of Missions know that there are people in this world that do not get 1 meal a day if they're lucky. Fasting brings a dependence on God. We learn that it's not necessarily the food that comes in. Yes, our bodies require food and water. You cannot go more than 3 days without drinking water. Food's a little bit longer than that, and you can fast for quite a while. I know some people that have done 20-day fasts, drinking juices and water and stuff. But when was the last time that you absolutely had to depend on God for your daily needs? Because you didn't know where your next meal was coming from. How much do you depend on God for your daily needs? Do you pray before you eat? When was the last time that you went on a fast of any kind? If you're a diabetic, you can't fast. Okay? You need doctor's permission to eat. Okay? But fasting isn't necessarily just from food. You can fast from food, drink. You can fast from TV. You can fast from technology. You can fast from anything that presents itself as a temptation to be put before God. Anything that is possible to take place with God, you can fast from. Okay? When was the last time you fasted from something of any kind? And on top of that, how much do you depend on God for your daily needs? Let's move on to the next section. The next section is verses 5 to 7. And here, we're talking about a temptation on the timing and the nature of Jesus' ministry. He says, then the devil took him into the holy city, Jerusalem, and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, on the other hand, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Satan takes Jesus to the top of the temple here and asks Jesus to prove himself by jumping off of the temple. And of all things, the devil quotes Scripture. Yes, folks, the devil knows his Scripture. He actually quotes Psalm 91, 11 and 12. That's actually the Psalm. And Psalm 91, by the way, if you've never read it, read it. Psalm 91 is a beautiful psalm. But Satan takes verses 11 and 12 here, and he plucks them out, what I would call cherry picking. And everybody knows what I think about cherry picking Scripture. Don't do that. But Satan cherry picks Scripture and pulls it out and tells Jesus, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Satan's like, if you're really the Son of God, jump off of here. Because God says that He's going to not let you strike your foot against a stone. He's going to protect you with His angels. Do it. If you're really the Son of God, do it. Jesus comes back at him by quoting Deuteronomy 6:16. He says, on the other hand, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Okay? You see, this relates back to Israel in the very next chapter of Exodus that we just looked at. This is Exodus 17, 1-7. Israel tested God by complaining about their thirst. Not only were they hungry, God provided food, manna and quail. That's what they ate for 40 years in the desert. God provided. But then they were thirsty. And Moses, he basically made water come out of a rock. You see, Israel tested God by complaining about their thirst, and in turn, God provided water from the rock at Meribah. Jesus, however, succeeds and refuses to test God by jumping off the temple. By jumping off the temple, it would have thrown off the timing and the nature of Jesus' ministry. You see, if Jesus were to just go and prove that he was the Son of God by jumping off the temple, the pinnacle of the temple, something tells me that angels coming and having him descend off the temple like something like we would see out of a Superman movie. He just kind of jumps off the temple and he lowers himself to the ground. Something tells me that people are going to instantly believe that he's not just anybody. He's the Son of God. That's going to throw off the timing and the nature of his ministry. More than likely, if he'd have jumped off the temple and he slowly descends down to the ground, people would have believed that he really was the Messiah and might not have gone to the cross because people would have already believed. He would have actually fit the idea that what they had, that he was supposed to accomplish the first time. Remember, when he came the first time, the Israelites thought that he was coming to bring an earthly kingdom, what we're going to see in the second coming. Even if he did go to the cross, the timing wouldn't have been God the Father's, but it would have been Jesus the Son. Do we test God by complaining too much? This is the picture of the temple. For the last section, the picture of the old man and the sitting down to pray, that's hanging up in my office. That was my grandparents' picture. That picture sticks in my mind like there's no tomorrow. This is a picture of the temple, what the temple might have looked like. And that pinnacle there, that flat rooftop up there, that's the temple right there. And that would have been the pinnacle that Satan took Jesus to. Do we test God by complaining too much? Are you testing God by jumping into something without considering him? Are we tempting God to protect us through a situation that we may not have his approval for? How often do you consider God in every decision you make during the day? How often do you consider God before you make a big decision? You see, half the time we go off and just do our own thing. We make a decision all willy-nilly, and we expect God to protect us through the midst of it. But if we had prayed it over and got his input on it first, he might have shown us what it is that we need to do. I've been painfully slow in learning this lesson. It's tough. It's tough. This is tough stuff. Not only that, not only jumping maybe or maybe not jumping into a situation you have approval for, but the complaining bit. Oh, I'm a complainer. I love to worry about my situation. Oh, poor me. We wonder why our kids kids do the same, that's half my fault because I do as much complaining as they do. That's why they pick it up. Are we testing God? Section 3. We're going to talk about glory and dominion of this section. This one's verses 8 to 10. He says, and the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Satan brings Jesus to a high mountain and shows Jesus the kingdoms of the world and offers to give them to him if he would only bow down and worship Satan. Jesus responds. This is actually quoted in two different places in Deuteronomy at 6:13 and 10:20. This is actually quoted in both places. And he says, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. You see, interestingly enough, even though Satan had influence over the world, ultimately, the world is not his to give. You know, Satan kind of sort of has dominion over the world as it is right now. But even as he has got this dominion here now, it is not his to give. Because eventually in Revelation, we learn that God is going to hand it to Jesus in the end anyway. Satan was tempting Jesus to take glory and dominion now. Not in God's timing, but in his timing. In a sense, Satan was tempting Jesus to join him in his rebellion to overthrow God. And thus worshiping Satan instead of God the Father. Do we give God the glory? He has dominion over this world and everything we have. You know, this picture that we've got up here, you know, I love this picture because of all the flags of the nations. And Satan's, you know, basically showing him the kingdoms of the world. And, you know, this whole scene here in this part of the scripture. And you see Jesus pointing to the sky to serve God alone. We needn't look too far in our world to find Satan controlling and influencing, maybe not controlling, but influencing governments around the world. We don't need to look too far because we can see rogue regimes all over the place. And the other half of it is that we can also see where God is leading and working in other nations. So Satan has dominion over this world at the present time. So do we worship the world, or do we recognize that everything is God's with our actions? Let me say that again. Do we worship the world, or do we recognize that everything is God's with our actions? You see, we can talk about how we recognize that everything belongs to God all day long. But what do your actions say about that? Do your actions actually say that everything belongs to God? When you're crossed with somebody in your path that needs help, do you help them, or do you find every excuse you can not to? Guilty as charged. Yeah. What is it that you worship with your actions? Do you give God the glory? As we wrap the sermon up today, we've got a big idea. And we see that despite the temptation, Jesus, the Son, remained obedient to the Father. That's the first one part that I gave you in the beginning. You see how Jesus remained obedient to the Father? Obedience is a big key in this. There are lessons that we can be learning from Jesus' example, and we need to take these lessons, my friends, and we need to practice them. We need to practice these lessons. Because, like the Garden of Eden, the devil tempted Adam and Eve with physical needs. Did he really say that you could eat of the fruit of the tree? The timing and nature of the ministry, glory and dominion. You can be greater than God. You can be like God, knowing good and evil. When you're faced with temptation, like I said in the beginning, we have a tendency to kind of gloss over temptation. It's something we know. We all know that everybody's tempted in one way or another. But we kind of gloss over this. So when you're tempted, who do you lean on? When you're tempted, do you lean on your own devices to get through the temptation? Because if you do, that's why you fail. I'm reminded of The Empire Strikes Back. I know it's a Star Wars thing. My wife's over here laughing at me. But I'm telling you, this line has more truth in it than what we care to admit. This is the point where Yoda is raising the X-Wing up out of the water, and he brings it to him and sets it down on dry ground. And Luke looks at him and says, I don't believe it. And Yoda looks at him and says, that is why you fail. Because you don't believe it. Yeah, he says it backwards. But there's a lot of truth in that. Coming with the idea of believing something is the idea of following through in your actions. If you don't really believe it, that's why you fail. If you're relying on your own devices to get through temptation, that's why you fail a lot. If you're relying on God to get you through, and like he says at the very beginning, in that first temptation, he says, man must not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Father. My friend, Satan knows Scripture. And he's going to do everything he can to try and twist your mind to tempt you to justify your actions by Scripture. Jesus is the one you need to rely on because he succeeded every point where man failed. He succeeded where we failed. When you're faced with temptation, rely on him. Don't rely on your own devices. Rely on him. Where are you at this morning? If you're like me, you face temptation on a daily basis. One way or another. I mean, it just, it is, you go down to hang out with the guys and they're all, mouthing and gossiping and, I'm guilty of it. It's working in too many restaurants, I get into that restaurant mode and I just fall with one of the guys, It actually feeds into the desire to be accepted is what it does. Or maybe you're tempted by food. Guilty as charged. Maybe you're tempted by technology. Maybe there's something about technology that tempts you to waste your time browsing through Facebook or Snapchat or maybe it's not even social media. Maybe it's a news feed. You browse through Fox News or CBS or CNN or something like that, and you love to browse through the news feeds. Maybe it's a temptation to confront everybody who you disagree with. No matter what your temptation is, I beg you to hand it over to the cross. Because through the cross, Jesus says, that we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. It is only by Christ that we can do these things. Stand and sing with me. We're going